Hey, thanks for joining us today. We want to do a video just on kind of the most basic straight ahead nitro finish. So just kind of like a nice opaque color on a closed grain body. No grain filling is required. We're basically just doing sanding sealer, color coats, clear coats, followed up by wet sanding and polishing. This is a desert tan color, one of Fender's kind of lineup from the early 50s, and just a color that I think looks really good. It's got kind of a greenish hue to it, and it opaques really nice and quickly, so it just lays down. It's a nice, easy color to finish with. So we'll take you through the process now, and yeah, thanks a lot. Okay, before we get this body into the spray booth, one thing that I like to do is to tape off the sides of the neck pocket. Otherwise, once everything's been finished and we try to put the neck in, if it's a nice tight neck pocket, the lacquer can actually have just enough build to make it really tight, and we don't want to risk cracking the lacquer once we're trying to put the neck in. So just a good kind of method is to just take some painter's tape and kind of tape off just the sides and even the bottom if you like, the base. I have this arm that I'm using for my painter's kit. If you don't already have kind of like a holster or something to paint on, you can make one out of wood. One thing that I will say though is that if you don't already have an arm that has like a slight bevel on it, it's a good idea just to put a few washers underneath so that the arm sits, like 2 millimeters kind of proud of the body, so that you don't have your lacquer kind of creeping up onto it, and then when you take it off, you risk cracking it, or you just have kind of a weird transition. So yeah, we'll get to the taping off of the neck pocket now.
Before we started spraying, we sanded the entire surface with 400 grit sandpaper, making sure to sand with the grain. This is an alder body, which is a closed grain wood, meaning that it didn't require any grain filling. Open grain woods like mahogany or ash have small pinhole sized pores all across the surface. They require filling if you're after a mirror flat shine like most factory finished guitars have. If you want to check out some more info on applying grain filler, check out our Guitar Finishing 101 video. Since this is a closed grain species, we just needed to make sure that we sealed up the wood nicely so that we had a consistent surface to apply our color coats on top of. We're not showing the full application here, but we applied 3 coats of sealer, each coat consisting of 3 passes, and that will likely use up your full can. We'll space the coats 1 hour apart from each other, and then we'll let it dry overnight. When spraying lacquer, it's always good to make sure that the relative humidity is less than 55%, where you could run into some blushing, which is when outside moisture doesn't have enough time to escape before the lacquer dries. Once our sealer coats were completed, we let the body dry overnight, and now we're on to wet sanding everything level. When the lacquer dries, it can leave an orange peel-like texture behind, and the purpose of sanding at this stage is just to remove any kind of texture and leave a completely smooth surface for our color coats to sit on top of. We're block sanding this with 400 grit, which will let us level everything pretty quickly, but if you're new to the process, you can go up a grit or two, like 600 grit, and that'll just reduce your chances of sanding through to bare wood. If this does happen and you sand through in an area, just make sure you give that area another quick shot of sealer before we move on to our color coats. I personally like to use mineral spirits or naphtha for wet sanding. Some people prefer water, but I find that this can swell the wood if it gets any exposed areas and ruin the finish. Mineral spirits won't swell the wood, but we do recommend wearing a respirator and gloves as it can present some fumes. When you finish with the wet sanding, it can be a good idea to let the body sit and dry overnight, or at least for a few hours, as you want to make sure that all the liquid has dried from the guitar and the cavities, whether you've used water, mineral spirits, or naphtha. Okay, we're on to our color coats now. You can see here that anytime we apply a new coat of lacquer, we quickly wipe down the surface with a tack cloth, just making absolutely sure that it's free of any dust or debris. Similar to our sealer, we'll aim for 3 coats, each consisting of 3 passes spaced 1 hour apart from each other. Before you start spraying, always make sure that you've shaken your can for at least 60 seconds, and this will make sure that the pigments or dyes are mixed well and that the color is being dispersed properly. You'll want to spray about 18 inches away from the instrument, and one of the more useful ways of controlling your spray is to start spraying off of the piece, move the spray pattern onto and across the instrument, and then stop the spray once it's moved off the piece again. This way you're always starting and stopping the flow of lacquer off of the instrument, and this just reduces the chances of a run or spats from the spray nozzle. With any solid color, you'll want to make sure that it's completely opaque without any inconsistencies. Make sure to examine it in a few different environments with different light sources. Sunlight is always the most honest, so take it outside and check your work before you decide to move on to your clear coats. Okay, we're on to our clear coats now. We'll be shooting about 12 coats total, which is approximately what 3 aerosols will deliver. This may seem like a lot, but when we move on to our final wet sanding, much of this will be sanded off in an effort to level everything out. So rest assured, we'll still be left with a nice thin finish, and it will dry super hard and resonant. We'll be spreading out the application across 4 days, again 3 coats per day, 1 hour between each. Make sure that you're always spraying in a well-ventilated area with a respirator. Be aware of any dust or particles that might be in the surrounding atmosphere, as they could easily end up in your finish. If by chance something does fall into your finish, like a hair or something small, the best method really is to stop spraying and let the piece dry overnight. Once the lacquer's had some time to dry, you can lift or gently sand the item out with something like 800 grit, just really lightly to remove the item, and then do a quick check to see if the finish looks okay or if another coat is required to smooth everything out. If you try to remove a piece of debris while the finish is still wet, there's a real chance of pushing it further into the wet lacquer, and that could just make the situation a lot worse.
Okay, so today we're going to be wet sanding and polishing our desert tan body. We finished up with our clear coats 4 weeks ago, so it's had a good amount of time to dry. Everything's nice and hard, and it's dried really thin. We're going to be wet sanding today with a series of grits from 400 all the way up to 1500 grit, and then we'll be using 2 types of polishing compound, both medium and fine, and that'll bring us up to a nice high gloss. I like these little sanding blocks for wet sanding because you can basically cut whatever grit that you need and attach it to the base here.
and it's just like a nice smooth sanding block. It's a good size for a guitar. It's probably about, I don't know, 2x4, I'd say, which is kind of just good for big surfaces. And then we have a couple smaller pieces, one for each grit, that we'll use for the different sides and contours, kind of cutaways where it's harder to get in there with any kind of a sanding block. As always, when we're wet sanding, we really want to be kind of just aware of any kind of corners and break angles, because it's just anytime you have an area like that, the lacquer just doesn't build as much. So if you're going to have a sand through, those are the areas that it's a little bit more likely to happen on. Something like the end, where, you know, the base of the guitar where you have some end grain, that's a culprit for sanding through, so we just want to be aware in those spots. I'm going to start with 400 grit, but if it's your first time wet sanding, you might want to consider doing 600 grit, so just, again, less chance of sanding through. So we'll get to it.
The initial leveling with 400 or 600 grit is what will take the majority of our time here, as we really don't want to switch to a finer grit until everything is completely level and matte appearance. Once we've finished with the first grit, there's no set time on what we should spend on each of the remaining grits. We just want to make sure that we give the surface a consistent sanding and remove the larger scratches from the grit before it. But just to give you a ballpark idea, I'd say the first grit probably took us about 30 minutes, while the finer grits took us about 5 to 10 minutes each. We always want to be careful not to sand through, so check your work often and go light on corners and break angles, as these are spots that are always prone to sanding through. After we've wet sanded up to 1500 grit, we're onto our final polishing, which consists of a medium and a fine polish. Use a soft microfiber cloth for each grade and work it onto the surface with small circular patterns. You'll see it'll start to shine up really quickly, especially with the medium compound. You can see here that the armrest, which is just polished for about a minute, has already taken on a really nice gloss compared to the rest of the top, which still looks matte from the wet sanding. Do the entire piece section by section and then move on to the fine compound, which should reduce any of the finer micro scratches. If you complete the polishing stage and still have noticeable scratches on the surface, you may have to go back and wet sand a little bit more, but first give it a good shot with a medium polish, as it's quite effective at removing scratches.
it.